Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop your answers and any suggestions in the comments, and I might give you a shout out at the end of my next video. Thanks for being here and for all your amazing support.
When Eleanor Graves arrived at St. Mary's Convent School, the first thing she noticed was the silence. The building had been empty for over 70 years, yet it stood almost perfectly preserved on a lonely hill in County Cork. Gray stone walls, ivy creeping across arched windows, and a bell tower that still cast its shadow over the empty courtyard. Her boots crunched over the gravel as she crossed to the main entrance. The wooden doors were half-rotted, their brass handles dulled by time. This was exactly what she'd come for, the ruins of a story long forgotten. As a historian for the Irish Heritage Restoration Project, Eleanor had seen plenty of decaying monasteries and abbeys, but there was something different about this place. The locals had refused to set foot near it. The contractor who had been hired to clear the grounds quit after 2 days, muttering something about voices at night. Eleanor brushed off the rumors. Ghost stories, she thought. Every old building in Ireland had them. Still, when she stepped through the door, the cold hit her like a wall. The main hall was lined with portraits of nuns and priests, their eyes faded but still watchful. Dust floated like slow snow in the thin light filtering through the stained glass. She set her recorder on, her voice echoing softly. Day 1, 14th of February, 2025. Arrival at St. Mary's Convent School. The structure remains stable. Objective: catalog historical materials related to the 1952 mass disappearance. The words felt clinical, detached, the way she preferred them. But that phrase, mass disappearance, still made her uneasy. According to church records, the entire children's choir, 19 students, and their conductor, Sister Agnes, had vanished during Easter service in 1952. The case was never solved. No bodies, no explanation. Eleanor clicked on her flashlight and began exploring. The chapel was breathtaking, even in decay. Rows of wooden pews faced a cracked marble altar. The faint smell of wax and mildew lingered. She paused when she saw the choir loft above, a narrow balcony where the children would have sung. On impulse, she climbed the winding staircase. The loft creaked under her weight. Beneath the dust lay hymn books, open as if someone had left in a hurry. One caught her eye. Its pages were yellowed, but the notes were still visible. A haunting melody titled Lux Aeterna. Eleanor hummed a few bars under her breath. The tune was oddly familiar, though she couldn't place where she'd heard it. Her voice echoed faintly back to her. Too faint, too distant. Then, just as she stopped humming, another voice continued for a moment longer. A child's voice. Clear, soft, and real. Eleanor froze. Hello? No answer. The air felt heavier suddenly, like the chapel was holding its breath. She exhaled slowly and forced a nervous laugh. Echoes! Just echoes! That night, she set up camp in the caretaker's office. She wasn't supposed to stay overnight, but the rain outside had turned into a storm. The wind howled through the corridors like distant singing. At midnight, she awoke to the faint sound of music. It was the same melody, Lux Aeterna, drifting from the chapel. She grabbed her recorder and flashlight, whispering, "It must be the wind through the organ pipes." But when she entered the chapel, the air was still. The organ stood silent, its keys covered in best. The singing continued, high, clear voices harmonizing perfectly. Children's voices. She followed the sound to the choir loft, but the moment she stepped on the first stair, the music stopped. A faint whisper replaced it. "Don't go up there." Eleanor turned, heart pounding. "Who's there?" Silence. The beam of her flashlight flickered, catching movement near the altar, something small darting behind the pews. She approached slowly, her breath visible in the cold air. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." She leaned over the pew. Nothing. But when she turned back toward the loft, all the hymn books were closed. In the morning, she found tiny footprints in the dust. Bare feet. Children's. They led from the choir loft down to the altar, circling it, then vanished beneath the floorboards. Eleanor crouched, tracing one print with her finger. "There's got to be a hidden passage," she murmured. She began inspecting the tiles around the altar and found one slightly loose. When she pried it open, a faint draft of cold air rose from below. A trapdoor. She hesitated, then pulled it open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. The air smelled damp, metallic, like rust and candle wax. She climbed down carefully, flashlight trembling in her hand. At the bottom was a small underground chamber lined with wooden pews. On the far wall, she saw Latin words painted in faded red. Cantus non obliviscator. The song never forgets. In the center stood an old reel-to-reel recorder surrounded by melted candles. She crouched and brushed off the dust. The tape inside was still intact. She rewound it and pressed play. Static. Then, faint, distant singing. It was Lux Aeterna. And then came a voice, trembling, whispering through the static. "Forgive us, Father. We didn't want to sing anymore." The tape ended in a sharp click. Eleanor stumbled back, heart hammering. "What the hell?" She turned to leave, but the stairs were gone. The trapdoor above had closed. She pounded on it. "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. Only the faint echo of her own panic. Then, softly, she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned, she saw them. 19 children, standing in the shadows, dressed in old choir robes, their faces pale and eyes hollow. At the front stood a nun, Sister Agnes, if the portrait above was accurate, her mouth stretched into a terrible smile. "Join us," the nun whispered. "We still need a voice for the solo." Eleanor backed up until she hit the wall. "You're not real!" Sister Agnes tilted her head. "We were real once." The children began humming Lux Aeterna, their voices filling the room until the walls vibrated. The sound grew louder, denser, suffocating. Eleanor covered her ears, screaming, "Stop it!" But the nun stepped forward, pressing a finger to Eleanor's lips. The song never forgets. When she woke, she was lying on the chapel floor. Daylight poured through the stained glass. The trap door was gone, sealed over by solid stone. She stumbled to her feet, dizzy. Had it all been a dream? She checked her recorder. The light was still blinking. It had captured everything. Shaking, she rewound the tape and hit play. At first, only static. Then her own voice. "Is anyone there?" Then faint children's laughter. And finally, a soft female whisper. "Welcome back, Sister Agnes." Eleanor dropped the recorder. "No! No! I'm not—" But when she looked at her reflection in a cracked mirror on the wall, her breath caught. She was wearing a black habit. Her face looked older, lined, weary, and her eyes, which once were hazel, were now ice blue, the same as Sister Agnes. Days later, a restoration crew arrived at the convent. They found Eleanor's tent still in the caretaker's office, but no sign of her. Only her recorder sitting on the altar. When they played it, they heard faint singing, 19 children's voices and one adult soprano harmonizing beautifully. The same melody looped endlessly.
That night, one of the workers swore he heard music echoing from the bell tower. When they looked up, they saw silhouettes, small figures standing shoulder to shoulder, swaying as if singing. The next morning, fresh footprints appeared in the dust, leading from the choir loft to the altar once again. Local villagers still avoid St. Mary's Hill. On quiet nights, they say, you can hear the faint rise and fall of voices carried on the wind. A choir rehearsing endlessly for a performance that never comes. And if you listen closely, beneath the harmony, you can hear a woman's voice whispering, "The song never forgets." A short and quick announcement here. If you're still listening and enjoying the story, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. It truly helps more than you know. And if you can, share it with your friends and family so our little horror family can keep growing. The drive to Mill Creek took longer than expected. The winding dirt road seemed endless, lined by pine trees that pressed close like silent sentinels. David Bennett gripped the steering wheel, the rental car bouncing over potholes. "Are we sure this is the right way?" Laura asked, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. He gave a tired smile. "That's what the map says. Cabin 14, Mill Creek Lodge. Romantic and remote, remember?" Laura laughed softly. "It better be worth it. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, no noise, just us." That had been the appeal. A honeymoon far away from the city, from schedules, phones, and people. Just peace and quiet. But as the trees thickened and the daylight dimmed, the quiet began to feel less like peace and more like isolation. The cabin stood at the end of a narrow trail overlooking a frozen creek. It was old but sturdy. Dark wood, stone chimney, and a porch swing creaking in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of pine sap and cold ash. A single bedroom, a small kitchen, a fireplace stacked with logs. Laura sighed contentedly. It's perfect. They unpacked, cooked canned soup, and sat by the fire as dusk settled. Outside, the forest whispered softly in the wind. Later, as they got ready for bed, David noticed a strange pattern carved into one of the wooden beams above the fireplace. A circle filled with lines like a wheel. "What's that?" he asked. Laura glanced up. "Decoration, maybe? You know how these old cabins are. Looks more like a symbol." She shrugged and climbed under the blanket. "Whatever it is, it's part of the charm. Come on, stop being spooky." He laughed and turned out the light. But long after Laura drifted to sleep, David lay awake, listening to the wind howl through the trees and the faint, rhythmic sound of something tapping
beneath the floorboards. By the second day, the isolation began to settle in. Laura woke early, humming quietly as she made coffee. She seemed radiant, more energetic than she'd been in months. David, though, couldn't shake the sense that something felt off. When he returned from chopping wood, he found her kneeling by the hearth, carving shapes into the floor with a small knife. "What are you doing?" he asked, startled. Laura looked up startled, too, as if she hadn't realized she'd been doing it. I don't know," she said, her voice small. "It just felt right." David knelt beside her. The mark she had carved matched the symbol over the fireplace, a circle with jagged lines radiating from its center. "Laura, this is weird. Where did you even see this before?" She blinked, confused. "I don't remember." That night, she spoke in her sleep. At first, it was just muttering, fragmented phrases, intelligible sounds. Then, as the hours dragged on, her voice deepened, the words growing rhythmic, deliberate. David sat up, chilled. "Laura?" he whispered. Her eyes snapped open, but they were rolled white. Her lips moved rapidly, whispering in a language he couldn't recognize. "Stop!" he shouted, shaking her shoulders. She gasped and woke, trembling. "David? What's wrong? You were talking in your sleep. It didn't even sound like you." She frowned, half awake. "You're imagining things. Go back to bed." But he couldn't. He sat staring at her for hours, watching her chest rise and fall, wondering what exactly had spoken through her. The next day, David decided to call the owner, but there was no signal, and the landline in the cabin was dead. When he told Laura, she seemed unconcerned. "We wanted to disconnect, didn't we?" He tried to smile, but his stomach twisted. "Yeah, I just didn't mean completely." She spent the afternoon outside, standing by the creek, whispering to herself. At first, I thought she was singing, but when I got closer, I realized she wasn't speaking English. The words came in a low hum, steady and rhythmic. When she noticed him, she stopped and smiled too brightly. "It's just something stuck in my head," she said. "From where?" "From the trees." That night, he heard footsteps circling the cabin. He grabbed the lantern and opened the door. Nothing. Just snow and darkness. Then, faintly, he saw tracks. Bare feet leading from the woods to the porch. He followed them around the side of the cabin. The footprints ended abruptly at the wall, as if the person had walked straight through it. David's breath caught. He rushed back inside. Laura sat in front of the fire, hair loose, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't go out there," she murmured without looking up. "Who doesn't?" "The ones under us." By morning, the carvings had spread. Every wooden surface, door frames, furniture, even the bedposts, bore the same circular marks. David stormed into the living room. "Laura, what the hell are you doing?" She turned slowly. Her eyes looked darker somehow, pupils too wide. "They want to come through," she said calmly. "The marks helped them." He grabbed her by the shoulders. "You're scaring me. We're leaving today." She smiled faintly. "You won't make it past the creek." He packed their bags in silence, forcing himself not to panic. But when he opened the front door, the path they had driven in on was gone. Snow covered everything except a circle cleared perfectly in front of the cabin, carved with dozens of symbols. Laura stood in the center of it, barefoot, humming the same low tune from before. "Laura!" he shouted, running towards her. She didn't move. Her body swayed gently as if in a trance. He grabbed her hand. "We're going, now!" Her head tilted slowly towards him. The voice that came out wasn't hers. "She belongs to us." He stumbled back. What are you talking about?" Laura's face twitched, eyes rolling upward. Her lips moved rapidly. Her voice layered with another tone, deeper, ancient. "She called us with her blood. We answer." He turned and ran for the car, but the engine refused to start. He slammed his hands against the steering wheel, screaming her name. When he looked up, she was standing in front of the hood, staring at him with a faint smile. The passenger door creaked open by itself. He jumped out of the car and bolted towards the forest, snow whipping against his face. The wind carried faint laughter, her laughter, from behind him. Hours later, exhausted, he stumbled into an open clearing. The air was unnaturally still. In the center stood an old wooden post, half buried in ice, covered with the same strange carvings. He knelt, brushing the snow away, and froze when he saw the words burned into the wood. Mill Creek Burial Site, 1843. Trespassers will be cursed. Suddenly, a voice whispered behind him, "You shouldn't have come here." He turned. Laura stood at the edge of the clearing, her skin pale as snow, her lips blue. "Laura, please, we can fix this." She glimmered with tears. "I can't stop it." Then she began to convulse, collapsing into the snow. He caught her, shaking her shoulders desperately. "Laura, stay with me." But when she opened her mouth, it wasn't a cry that came out. It was a scream that didn't sound human. The air around them rippled, the trees bent inward, the ground trembling. The circle of symbols around the post began to glow faintly red. David dragged her away, shouting her name, but she clung to him, nails digging into his arms. "You promised forever. Now forever is all we have." He broke free and sprinted towards the cabin. The door slammed shut behind him before he could reach it. Inside, the fire roared, though no one had lit it. Laura appeared in the doorway, hair matted with snow, her eyes black. "Let them in," she whispered. "Stop! You're not my wife!" She smiled sadly. "You're right. She's gone." The flames surged, crawling up the walls, licking at the ceiling. The air filled with screams, hundreds of voices, crying and laughing all at once. David stumbled backwards, his vision spinning. Through the smoke, he saw shapes forming in the flames, faces, hands, shadows twisting together. He lunged towards Laura, trying to pull her away, but she grabbed his wrists with impossible strength. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay with me." The light grew blinding. When the fire finally burned out, only ashes remained. Days later, a forest ranger hiking through the area found the cabin, or what was left of it. Inside the charred ruins, he discovered two blackened silhouettes on the wall beside the hearth, a man and a woman, holding hands. In the ash, faintly visible, were dozens of circular carvings. He radioed it in, muttering, "Another lightning fire, I guess." But as he turned to leave, he heard something faint, a woman's voice, soft as wind through the trees. "Stay a while." The ranger froze. When he looked back, the wall seemed different. The shadows weren't silhouettes anymore. They were faces. Two of them, smiling faintly through the soot. The neon clock on the studio wall read 11:57 p.m. when Tom Reeves leaned into his microphone and said, "All right, folks, this is Midnight Hour Radio, and you're riding the waves with me, Tom Reeves, until the break of dawn." His voice was deep, smooth, and steady, the kind that made lonely night shift workers feel less alone. He'd been a late-night DJ in Cincinnati for nearly a decade, spinning rock, blues, and ghost stories between tracks. But on that particular night in October 1976, he was about to discover something that didn't belong on any playlist. It started with static. Tom was scanning through shortwave bands during a long commercial break, fiddling out of boredom. He liked to explore frequencies, hoping to catch signals bouncing in from Canada or the Caribbean, sometimes truckers chatting, sometimes faint music. But then, somewhere around 13.666 megahertz, he found silence. Not dead air, just heavy silence, like the air itself was humming. Then faintly, he heard a whisper. "Hello, Tom." He froze. The voice was low and gravelly, almost drowned in static. "Who is this?" he said, leaning closer to the receiver. No answer. Only a strange, pulsing hum that seemed to echo the rhythm of his heartbeat. When he turned the dial slightly, the signal vanished. He chuckled nervously into the mic as the next track faded in. "All right, folks, looks like the ghosts are up early tonight." But part of him knew that voice wasn't interference. It had said his name. The next night, he tuned in again. Same frequency, same eerie silence. Nothing at first. Then at 12:03 a.m., the static thickened, and a voice came through clearer this time. "Tom, we remember you." His throat went dry. "This is WBEX Radio. Who am I speaking to?" The voice crackled, distorted. "Don't you know?" Then came a sound, faint sobbing, then laughter. He switched the dial off and leaned back, pulse racing. It had to be someone playing a prank, maybe the engineers, maybe rival DJs. Still, when he got home at dawn, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that voice, "We remember you." 2 nights later, the station's sound engineer Rick Lawson joined him in the booth. "All right, genius, let's hear your ghost station." Tom grinned weakly. "You'll see." He tuned the frequency again. The static came immediately, deep, low, almost like breathing. Then, faint voices layered together, murmuring phrases too jumbled to understand. Rick frowned. That's not normal. It's like reversed speech. Tom turned up the gain slightly. The words became clearer, a whispering chant, rhythmic and urgent. Then one voice rose above the rest, slow and deliberate. "Tom Reeves, 1962, The River." Tom went pale. Rick looked at him. "What's that supposed to mean?" Tom swallowed. I don't know." But he did. He hadn't thought about it in years. The night he and his brother Danny had gone night fishing by the Ohio River. Danny had fallen in. The current was fast. By the time rescue came, it was too late. And somehow, that voice had said the year it happened. Rick turned the radio off, uneasy. "Forget it, man. You're getting obsessed. That's not a station. It's something else." Tom nodded, but his mind was already racing. Over the next week, he recorded every session. At first, the voices were indistinct. Then one night, he heard his brother's voice. Faint, but unmistakable. "Tom, why did you leave me?" He froze, trembling, his hand hovering over the switch. "Danny? You left me in the dark. I called for you." Jesus Christ! The static howled, spiking into a pitch that made the studio speakers hiss. Rick burst in from the hall. "What the hell's happening?" Tom pointed at the receiver, voice shaking. "It's him! I heard Danny!" Rick killed the power. The sound died instantly, leaving the room silent but heavy. "Tom," he said quietly, "that frequency isn't coming from anywhere. I checked the logs. It's not on the band registry. It shouldn't exist." Tom stared at the darkened radio. "Then where the hell is it coming from?" That question haunted him. He started researching late at night, combing through technical manuals, trying to triangulate the signal's origin. Every test led to nowhere, as if the frequency had no source, just endless echoes. One night, he called an old ham radio operator named Walter Briggs, known for tracking dead frequencies. Walter listened carefully as Tom explained, then said, "You said it's on 13.666? "Yeah." Walter's voice tightened. "You stay away from that. They call it the devil's frequency. Been banned since the 50s. Every time someone locks onto it, bad things happen. People go missing, or worse." "Missing?" Walter exhaled. "A ham operator in Kentucky picked it up in '59. Said he heard voices calling his name. Next morning, his wife found the radio still running, but he was gone. The chair was empty." Tom laughed weakly. "You're saying a radio swallowed him?" Walter's tone stayed grave. "I'm saying the signal isn't coming from this side." By the next broadcast, Tom couldn't resist testing it live on air. He queued up the frequency during his midnight slot. "For our listeners just tuning in, we're about to try something a little different tonight. Ever heard of the devil's frequency?" He turned the dial, the studio filled with soft static. Rick stormed into the booth, mouthing, "Don't do this on air." But then a voice cut through the noise. "Tom Reeves, welcome back." Listeners flooded the station's phone lines. One caller screamed, "Who's talking? What is that?" Another voice layered over the first, a woman's this time. "We waited. You opened the door." Tom felt a sharp pressure in his ears, like altitude sickness. The static deepened into an almost musical hum, pulsing through the walls. Rick yanked the power cord, and every light in the building went out. They sat in the dark for almost a full minute before the emergency backup lights flickered on. Rick looked shaken. "You just broadcast that to half the city." Tom stared at the now silent radio. "Maybe they needed to hear it." "You're losing it, man." But Tom wasn't listening, because in the corner of the studio window, in the reflection of the glass, he swore he saw a face. A pale, hollow-eyed version of his brother, mouthing something he couldn't hear. When he turned around, no one was there. The following morning, Tom didn't come to work. Rick drove to his apartment. The door was unlocked. Inside, every surface was covered in audio tape reels, hours of recordings labeled with dates and strange phrases. 13.666 session, voices rising, Danny's echo. The radio on the desk was tuned to static. Rick pressed play on one of the tapes. It began with Tom's voice. "If anyone finds this, don't tune in. It's not a station, it's an invitation." Then in the background, faintly, laughter. Childlike, but wrong. The recording ended with Tom whispering, "They said they'll take me where the sound never ends." Rick called the police. They searched the apartment, the studio, the woods behind his building. No sign of Tom Reeves. But 2 days later, WBEX's main transmitter began broadcasting a signal no one had programmed, just static, followed by a single sentence repeated every hour. "This is Tom Reeves. Welcome to the other side." The station shut down the feed, but the signal persisted even after the transmitter was disconnected. Finally, they removed the antenna tower entirely. Still, on certain nights, old truckers claimed to hear Tom's voice between frequencies, smooth, calm, forever stuck at midnight. In 1983, a college student doing a thesis on paranormal radio found one of Tom's original reels in an old archive box. The label simply read, "The River." When she played it, there was silence for 10 seconds. Then faintly, "Tom Reeves signing off forever." And beneath it, almost too quiet to notice, the sound of rushing water. Years later, WBEX reopened under a new name and new management. They cleared out the old broadcast room, stripped the walls, replaced the equipment. On the very first night of programming, the new DJ joked on air, "Welcome back to Cincinnati's Smooth Night Sounds, where even the ghosts tune in." The red on-air light flickered once. Then, through the headphones, the DJ heard it, faint, buried under the music, a whisper only he could hear. "Hello, Tom." He froze. His name wasn't Tom.
The first time Arthur Bellamy saw the painting of Emily Cross, he thought it was beautiful, too beautiful to be real. The portrait was kept in the attic of an old Victorian house on the outskirts of Bath, covered in a dusty sheet and leaning against a cracked wall. The canvas itself was enormous, the frame gilded and ornate, though dulled by time. Beneath the grime, he could make out the faint image of a young woman. Dark curls, porcelain skin, a high-necked dress of emerald green. Even through the filth and age, her eyes seemed alive. Arthur crouched down, brushing away cobwebs with the care of a man handling a sleeping creature. "You said she was your great-aunt?" he asked, glancing back toward the woman standing in the doorway. "Yes," said Mrs. Langford, the current owner of the estate. Her voice trembled slightly. "Emily Cross. She died in 1891. Rather unexpectedly." Arthur looked again at the faint smile on the painted lips. "It's a fine piece of work. A shame it's in this state. I can restore it, but it'll take time." Mrs. Langford nodded quickly. "You can use the study downstairs. I'd rather you didn't bring that thing home with you." "That thing?" Arthur laughed softly. "It's a painting, Mrs. Langford." Her face tightened. "You'll understand once you've spent some time with her." Arthur was a man who prided himself on logic. He'd restored dozens of antique works, religious pieces, landscapes, portraits of noblemen and forgotten ladies, and he didn't believe in any of the stories whispered about cursed art. He set up his tools in the dim study, the room smelling faintly of cedar and decay. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. He placed the portrait upright on an easel, adjusted his lamp, and began the first cleaning pass. Under the solvent, the grime melted away like old skin. Bit by bit, Emily's face emerged. Delicate features, pale cheeks flushed with a faint blush, and those uncanny gray-green eyes that seemed to know something he didn't. For a brief second, Arthur thought her lips moved. Just a twitch. A trick of the light, surely. He stepped back, frowning. "Don't be ridiculous," he muttered. But the feeling lingered. By the third night, Arthur noticed something odd. He had been working late, brushing varnish across the lower half of the portrait when the lamp flickered. He sighed and adjusted the wick. When the light steadied, he froze. Emily's eyes were looking directly at him. He knew, absolutely knew, that the artist had painted her gaze slightly to the left, just past the viewer's shoulder. Now they met his perfectly. Cold, steady, almost expectant. Arthur stood motionless, brush in hand. He glanced away for a moment, then looked back. The eyes had shifted again, angled away as before. He let out a shaky breath and forced a laugh. "Fatigue," he said aloud. "Simple fatigue." Still, he couldn't bring himself to stay much longer that night. Mrs. Langford found him in the morning, asleep at his work table, surrounded by sketches and pigment jars. "You've made wonderful progress," she said carefully, her gaze lingering on the painting. Arthur rubbed his eyes. "She's remarkable. The more I work on her, the more real she looks." Mrs. Langford's expression darkened. "You're not the first to say that." "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "The original artist, George Hensley, died just weeks after finishing the piece. They said he went mad, started shouting about how she spoke to him through the canvas." Arthur chuckled nervously. "Superstitions. Painters get obsessive, that's all." "Maybe," she said softly. "Just don't let her look at you too long." That night, Arthur stayed later than usual. The more he worked, the more the portrait seemed to come alive under his brush. He found himself whispering to it as he painted, asking her how she had wanted her hair, whether she liked the shade of green on her dress. He wasn't sure when he started expecting an answer. At midnight, he stepped back to admire his progress. The lamp's flame trembled slightly, casting a warm glow over Emily's face. For a brief instant, he could have sworn she smiled. A real smile, not the painted one. He blinked, leaned closer. No change, but something in the air had shifted, colder, denser. He packed up quickly and left the study, locking the door behind him. As he walked down the hallway, he heard a faint tapping from inside, like fingers on glass. The dreams began soon after.
He saw Emily standing in a meadow, her green dress rippling in the wind, her eyes pleading. When she opened her mouth, her voice came through not as sound, but as a vibration, a low, echoing hum that rattled his ribs. He woke drenched in sweat, her face burned into his mind. Each morning, he swore he wouldn't return to that house, and each evening he did. One afternoon, while cleaning the frame, Arthur found something wedged behind the canvas. A small envelope sealed with dark wax. He broke it open carefully. Inside were letters, love letters from a man named Edward Langford to Emily Cross. The last one read, "My dearest Emily, I beg you not to see him again. The painter means you harm. I've seen what his brush does. He steals life. Please, my love, stay away before he binds you to that canvas forever." Arthur read the line 3 times, his mouth dry. Then he noticed the date, March 1891, the same month Emily died. He glanced up at the portrait. Emily's eyes seemed brighter than ever, almost wet. "You poor thing," he whispered. "He killed you, didn't he?" The air around him thickened, a faint scent of lavender rising. And then, barely audible, came a whisper. "Help me." Arthur stumbled back, knocking over a jar of turpentine. His pulse thundered in his ears. "No, I didn't. No one's here." But the whisper came again, this time from right behind him. "Finish me." The next days passed in a blur. Arthur didn't leave the house. He stopped answering Mrs. Langford's knocks. The servants whispered about strange noises, soft laughter, the scrape of a chair, someone talking to themselves late into the night. When Mrs. Langford finally unlocked the study, she found the room transformed. The walls were covered in charcoal sketches of Emily's face, dozens of them, some smiling, some screaming. The air stunk of varnish and sweat. And in the center stood Arthur, pale and trembling, staring at the nearly completed portrait. "She's almost ready," he said, voice cracked from disuse. "She just wants to be perfect." Mrs. Langford backed away slowly. "Mr. Bellamy, you need rest." He turned toward her with a blank expression. She doesn't like to be left alone. That night, a storm rolled across Bath. Rain hammered the windows, lightning flashing through the study. Arthur sat before the portrait, brush in hand. Emily looked radiant, more alive than any painting should be. Her eyes glowed faintly in the lightning's flicker. He touched up the final line of her jaw, whispering, "There, my dear, you're whole again." A deep, sighing breath filled the room. Arthur froze. The canvas rippled, the surface trembling as if something beneath the paint moved. Emily's eyes widened, and her lips, those painted lips, parted. "Thank you," she breathed. Arthur staggered back, the brush falling from his hand. "Dear God!" Her voice grew stronger. "I was trapped. He took my soul. But now—" The lamp burst, plunging the room into darkness. Arthur fumbled for the door, but the knob burned his palm. The air crackled with static, whispering voices swirling around him. He turned and saw her stepping out of the canvas. For a split second, she was ethereal, shimmering like liquid glass. Then she solidified, eyes gleaming with something ancient and hungry. Arthur fell to his knees. "What are you?" Emily smiled. "I'm free, and you will take my place." Before he could scream, she reached out and pressed her hand against his chest. He felt every nerve ignite, his vision blurring as the room tilted sideways. The last thing he saw was her face, serene, almost grateful, before everything went black. When Mrs. Langford entered the study the next morning, she found the lamp shattered, the furniture overturned. The smell of ozone hung in the air.
Arthur Bellamy lay motionless before the easel, eyes wide open, body stiff. His expression was one of frozen terror. But it was the painting that made her drop the candle. Emily Cross was gone. In her place stood Arthur, painted perfectly, brush in
Hand, staring out from the canvas with eyes full of silent horror. The police called it a heart attack. They covered the painting, locked the study, and told Mrs. Langford to move on. She didn't. 3 months later, when she finally dared to look beneath the cloth, she found 2 figures in the portrait now. Emily beside Arthur, smiling faintly. And in the dim afternoon light, their painted eyes seemed to follow her as she fled the room. The first entry in the diary was dated April 3rd, 1887. The Lord speaks to me in silence. He says I must cleanse the wicked, even if the wicked wears my own face. Rachel Lawson frowned at the handwriting, jagged, uneven, written with such pressure that the ink had bled through the page. She sat cross-legged on the floor of her new apartment, the small leather-bound book balanced on her knees. She'd found it tucked under a loose floorboard while unpacking her bookshelves that morning. Her flat was nothing special, an old Victorian unit in downtown Boston, tall windows, creaky floors, the faint smell of dust and old plaster. But something about that diary felt alive, almost humming when she held it. The name on the inside cover read, Jonah Pike, 1887, Preacher, St. Andrew's Parish. She smiled uneasily. Well, Jonah, let's see what your sermons were about. That night, she couldn't sleep. The rain beat softly against the windows, and she found herself drawn back to the diary on her bedside table. She opened it again, flipping through brittle pages filled with verses, confessions, and increasingly frantic lines. I see their sins through their eyes. The filth of their desires burns my tongue. I will save them, even if it kills me. The last few pages were smudged with what looked like dried blood. Rachel closed the book quickly. Her lamp flickered once and went out. The room went dark, and somewhere, faintly, she thought she heard whispering. By the next morning, she had convinced herself it was just her imagination. Moving stress, bad lighting, maybe the creaky plumbing. But when she opened her notebook to jot down a grocery list, she froze. The words scrawled across the page weren't hers. They read, "Confess, Rachel." Her pen fell from her hand. She stared at the ink, still glistening as if freshly written. Very funny. Whoever's doing this, stop. But she lived alone. A few days passed. The whispers grew clearer, mostly at night, just as she was falling asleep. Sometimes they came from the walls, sometimes from beneath the floor. She started dreaming of a man in a black coat, standing in her hallway, his face hidden by shadows. Each morning she woke with fresh smudges of ink on her fingertips and new diary entries that hadn't been there before. April 9th, 1887. The girl's voice echoes mine. The vessel is almost ready. Her friend Leela, a psychology student, visited one afternoon. You look awful, Leela said, dropping onto the couch. You've got dark circles like you haven't slept in days. Rachel laughed nervously. Haven't been sleeping much, no. Weird noises. I keep hearing someone whispering. Old buildings do that. Pipes, wood expansion, your brain filling the gaps. Yeah, maybe. Rachel handed her the diary. But what about this? Leela flipped through it. Creepy. but still just paper. Read the last line." She did. "The vessel is almost ready." Leela raised an eyebrow. "So what? Maybe the guy was insane." Rachel sighed. "Last night that line wasn't there." Leela looked at her, uncertain whether to laugh or worry. "You need a break, Rach. Close the book and get out for a bit." That evening, Rachel locked the diary in a drawer. She turned on the TV, poured herself a glass of wine, and tried to forget it. But when she got up to refill her glass, she saw something carved into the kitchen wall. Faint, but unmistakable. "Confess." The letters were fresh, etched deep into the paint. She stumbled backward, the glass shattering on the floor. A deep, rasping voice whispered from the darkness, "He sees through you." Rachel screamed, turning toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Only the open drawer where the diary had been locked moments ago. It was sitting on the table now, open to a new entry. April 12th, 1887. The vessel resists, but she cannot hide her sins forever. That night, Rachel dreamed she was standing in an old wooden church. The pews were empty, but she could hear someone preaching, a man's voice echoing through the walls. She followed the sound to the pulpit. There, standing behind it, was Jonah Pike. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes black as coal. He pointed at her and thundered, "You are unclean." She screamed, waking, drenched in sweat. The diary lay open on her chest. By now, the changes were undeniable. When she looked in the mirror, her eyes seemed darker. Her reflection sometimes moved a fraction slower than she did. Leela came again, worried. "You need help," she said, gripping Rachel's arm. "I called a priest, just to talk, maybe a cleansing ritual or something." Rachel pulled away. "No, I can handle it." "Handle what?" Rachel hesitated. "He's here." Leela's expression softened. "Who?" "Jonah Pike. He wants me to finish what he started." That evening, the priest arrived. Father McAllister, an elderly man with kind eyes and a weary face. He listened patiently as Rachel explained. When she showed him the diary, he frowned. "I've heard of Pike. He was excommunicated for extreme practices. Believed he could cast out sin through physical purging. Several people died under his care." Rachel's hands trembled. "I think he's inside this book." Father McAllister opened it cautiously, flipping through pages. "This is a relic of obsession, not faith. You must destroy it." "I've tried," she whispered. "It doesn't burn." The priest looked at her uneasily. "Then we'll try something else." He placed the diary on the floor, sprinkled holy water over it, and began to pray. The pages fluttered violently as if caught in a wind. Rachel screamed, her body convulsing, eyes rolling back. Father McAllister stumbled backward, shouting verses. A deep, inhuman voice erupted from Rachel's throat. "You cannot cast out what was invited." The lamp exploded, plunging the room into darkness. When the light returned, the diary lay open on the floor, smoking faintly. Father McAllister was gone. Rachel stood in the center of the room, her eyes black, her lips curled into a faint smile. 2 days later, Leela came to check on her. The door was unlocked. The apartment smelled of incense and blood. Rachel sat at her desk, writing calmly in the diary. Her hand moved in sharp, deliberate strokes, filling page after page. "Rachel," Leela whispered. Rachel looked up. Her pupils were pinpoints, her smile wrong. "He's helping me cleanse the city," she said softly. "There's so much sin to erase." Leela backed away, trembling. "Rachel, please." But Rachel's voice deepened. "Jonah says your soul is stained." Leela ran. When police arrived later that night, the apartment was empty. The only thing left was the diary, open to a fresh entry. April 21st, 2025, she joins the faithful. The work begins anew.
Months later, the new tenant, a young man named Aaron Price, moved into the same apartment. While unpacking, he found a small, leather-bound diary tucked beneath a loose floorboard. He brushed off the dust and smiled. Old tenant's notebook, maybe. He opened to the first page and read aloud, "The Lord speaks to me in silence. He says, I must cleanse the wicked." He laughed softly. Creepy. Then he heard a whisper, faint but close. "Welcome back, Jonah."
The concierge hesitated before handing over the brass room key. "You're certain you want that one, sir?" he asked. James Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Room 302? That's what I booked online." The concierge's polite smile flickered. "It hasn't been occupied in years. We usually keep it sealed." James chuckled, tucking the key into his pocket. "Perfect. I'm a travel writer. That's exactly the kind of story I'm looking for." The man behind the desk glanced toward the grand staircase of the Hotel Orlov, an elegant boutique hotel tucked in a quiet Prague side street. "As you wish, Mr. Holloway. Breakfast is from 7 to 10. If you require anything, I'll scream," James joked. The concierge didn't laugh. Room 302 was tucked at the end of the third-floor corridor, far from the rest of the occupied rooms. The wallpaper was peeling in ornate patterns, and the air smelled faintly of iron. Inside, everything looked ordinary. A large bed, antique furniture, heavy curtains. But the mirror above the dresser caught his attention immediately. It was massive, floor to ceiling, framed in dark wood carved with symbols he couldn't place. Despite its age, the glass gleamed flawless and cold. He leaned closer. "You're beautiful," he murmured to his reflection. Then he noticed something strange. Carved in the corner of the frame, almost invisible in the shadows, were the words, "The Holloway Possession, 1894. He frowned. His own surname. Coincidence, surely. Still, a shiver ran down his spine. That night, he set up his tape recorder and camera to capture a bit of ambience for his article, an old hotel aesthetic. The city lights flickered outside the window. The clock struck midnight. He reviewed his first recordings and frowned. On the tape, beneath his narration, a faint whisper could be heard. "You came back." He replayed it twice. Same line, same breathy tone. "Faulty tape," he muttered, setting it aside. But when he turned toward the mirror, he froze. His reflection wasn't matching him anymore. When he tilted his head left, it lagged, half a second too late. When he stepped back, the reflection smiled faintly, though his own mouth stayed still. "Okay, I've officially been awake too long." He switched off the lights and climbed into bed. But as he drifted off, he could feel it, the weight of eyes watching him through the dark. By morning, he'd convinced himself it was exhaustion. He made notes about the hotel's architecture, the Prague skyline, and the strange mirror for color. At breakfast, the concierge approached his table cautiously. "You slept in 302, yes?" "Yes," James said. "Why?" He hesitated. "You should know, your family name appears in our archives. There was a Dr. Edmund Holloway who stayed in that same room. In 1894. James set down his fork. And? The concierge lowered his voice. "He was found dead in front of the mirror." His reflection was still moving. James laughed. Urban legends sell magazines, but not me. The concierge didn't laugh back. Legends often start with truth, sir. Back in his room, the air felt heavier. He stood before the mirror, studying his own face. "All right, Edmund, if you're in there, blink twice." He smirked, until his reflection did exactly that. 2 slow blinks. James stumbled backward. No, that didn't... He looked again. The reflection was normal now. He grabbed his camera, snapping photos of the glass from different angles. Each photo came out the same, except for one. In the last photo, his reflection was smiling wide, teeth showing, even though he'd been frowning. That evening, he tried covering the mirror with a bedsheet. The air immediately warmed, and the tension in his chest eased. But around midnight, a rustling sound woke him. The sheet had fallen to the floor. He sighed and walked toward it, but his reflection was still standing, perfectly upright, watching him. His breath caught. What the... Then slowly, the reflection raised its hand and pressed it flat against the inside of the glass. He backed away, shaking. "Stop it!" The reflection smiled, a deep, unnatural grin. The glass began to ripple like water. He ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle was frozen solid. Behind him, the voice from the recorder whispered again, clearer this time. "You came back to finish what he started." He stumbled toward his recorder, slamming the stop button. "Who are you?" he shouted into the dark. A whisper answered from the mirror. "We are the same." He turned and saw another man standing beside his reflection, an older version of himself, dressed in a 19th century suit. "Edmund Holloway," the figure said calmly. "Your ancestor and your destiny." "I don't believe this." Edmund smiled. "Neither did I." The reflection behind him reached out again, the surface bending outward, bulging like liquid glass. "Join us," Edmund said. "You belong here." He stumbled back, tripping over the bed. No. The lights flickered, and the mirror pulsed, once, twice, then went still. The room fell silent. He crawled toward the window, heart hammering. He couldn't see his own reflection anymore, just the empty room behind him. And faintly, in the center of the mirror, words appeared in fogged breath. "Let me out." At dawn, the maid found room 302 empty. The bed was untouched, the window open. On the floor sat James's camera, its last photo developed automatically, showing him standing before the mirror, eyes wide, hand pressed flat to the glass. The reflection was gone. 2 days later, the editor of Traveler's Digest received a package from Prague. No return address. Inside was a single page of handwritten notes from James Holloway. The stories were true. The mirror doesn't reflect, it remembers. Every soul that gazes too long becomes part of it. I can hear them whispering inside now. Edmund is smiling at me. I think I'll stay. Below the note, someone had scrawled in a different handwriting, "Room 302 welcomes you." Today, the Hotel Orlov's room 302 remains locked. Tourists who stay in the rooms nearby claim they sometimes hear tapping from inside the walls, like tingers against glass. And when the corridor lights flicker at night, guests who glance too quickly at the polished brass door number swear they see a faint reflection staring back. A man with wide eyes and a camera in his hands. The hotel brochure still lists the room as under renovation. But the staff know better, because every month, a new photograph appears on the dresser inside, black and white, slightly blurred. showing a new guest, smiling back through the mirror. And each face looks a little more like James Holloway.
The sun never truly rose that far north. For Dr. Evelyn Clark, that was part of the appeal. 2 months into the Arctic research mission, the world was nothing but white horizon and humming generators. She had come to study seismic vibrations beneath Lake Liderson. But the readings suggested something strange, something alive. Her assistant, Jonas Pedersen, placed a headset on her desk. "We picked up the signal again. Same pattern, same pitch. Thought you'd want to hear it yourself." Evelyn slipped on the headphones, expecting the usual low-frequency groans of ice shifting. Instead, she heard a whisper. Not mechanical, not wind. A voice. It was faint, muffled, but undeniably human. Jonas frowned as she froze. "You hear it, don't you?" She nodded slowly. "Play it back." He rewound the tape. The sound came again, clearer this time, long, stretched syllables in a rhythm almost like a chant. Evelyn's pulse quickened. "That's not natural movement. Someone's speaking." Jonas forced a laugh. "Come on, under 30 feet of frozen water?" She didn't answer, because deep inside, the hum, she thought she heard her name. The next day, she isolated the recording and ran it through a frequency filter. Under the static, the voice repeated the same 3 words in Latin. "Libera nos Domine." Deliver us, O Lord. She scribbled notes furiously. The phrase appeared in exorcism rites and ancient burial rituals. Jonas leaned over her shoulder. "You're saying this is religious?" "Maybe, or something pretending to be." At night, she played the sample again. After the 10th loop, she realized something chilling. The voice had changed. Now, instead of Latin, it whispered in English. "Evelyn." She ripped off the headphones, heart pounding. "No," she whispered. "It's just pareidolia, just noise." But when she checked the recording log, the waveform had shifted exactly where the voice had said her name. 3 days later, the weather turned violent. Blizzards rolled over the lake, cutting visibility to near zero. The team huddled inside the base station, drinking lukewarm coffee. "We'll wait it out," Jonas said, rubbing his eyes. "No point in drilling until it clears." Evelyn couldn't stop replaying the transmission. Every time she listened, it sounded closer, clearer, as if the voice was moving upward through the layers of ice. That night, she woke to a soft, rhythmic sound. Knocking. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. She sat up, heart racing. The sound was coming from beneath the floor. She pressed her ear to the metal and heard whispering. Dozens of voices murmuring in unison just beneath the surface. "Jonas!" she shouted, shaking him awake. "Do you hear that?" He groaned. "It's the pipes, Evelyn. Go to sleep." But she stayed awake until dawn, listening to the whispers fade with the wind. The next morning, she made a decision. Storm or not, she was drilling. She set up the portable auger near the frozen lake edge, ignoring Jonas' protests. "You're insane," he said, wrapping his parka tighter. "We could fall through." "Then don't follow me," she snapped. The machine roared to life, carving through the ice like a mechanical scream. The air filled with shards of frozen mist. After 5 minutes, the auger stopped with a metallic clang. She peered down the shaft. The hole glistened dark blue, water rippling faintly below. Then she heard it again. The voice. Closer this time. "Evelyn, help us!" Her breath hitched. "Jonas, record this." He hesitated. "That's the wind! It's not the wind!" She knelt, lowering a hydrophone into the hole. The signal spiked immediately. The voices rose in a slow chant, layered and sorrowful. Then came a sound like cracking, deep, resonant, spreading outward.
Jonas shouted, "The ice is shifting! Move!" But she didn't. She was frozen in place, staring into the hole where faint light shimmered from below, like torches moving underwater. Then something touched her boot. A hand. Pale, skeletal fingers pressed up through the ice, gripping her ankle. Evelyn screamed as Jonas pulled her back. The ice shattered, spraying shards across the surface. The hand vanished, leaving only dark water. They stumbled toward the station, breathless, snow pelting their faces. When they slammed the door shut, Evelyn collapsed against the wall. "You saw it! Tell me you saw it!" Jonas's face was ashen. "We're leaving. Tonight." But they couldn't. By nightfall, the storm had grown into a whiteout. Their radio was dead, the generator flickering. Jonas paced while Evelyn replayed the new recording. This time, the voice was unmistakably human. A woman's voice this time, pleading through static. "Free us before the thaw. They will rise when the ice breaks." Jonas slammed his fist on the table. "Shut it off!" She turned to him, eyes wide. "She said they'll rise." He glared at her. "You need to stop listening." But she didn't. At 3:17 a.m., the temperature rose by 5 degrees, impossible for that region. The ice began to groan, echoing across the valley like thunder. Jonas burst into the lab. "Evelyn, get up! The sensors are off the charts!" She stared at the hydrophone monitor. "They're moving! Beneath us!" The audio feed spiked violently. Voices screamed through the speakers, not whispers anymore, but cries of agony. Then, abruptly, silence. The lights went out. Jonas grabbed a flashlight. "We're going to the snowcat, now." But when he opened the door, a blast of freezing air hit them, carrying faint singing. Children's voices, soft, rhythmic, echoing across the frozen lake. They froze. Jonas whispered, "Where's it coming from?" Evelyn raised her recorder. "Everywhere." They trudged through the snow toward the vehicle, but visibility was near zero. The singing grew louder, layered with screams. Then Jonas slipped. Evelyn turned her beam downward and screamed. He was half submerged in the ice, his arms flailed, eyes wide with terror. "Evelyn, help me!" She grabbed his wrist, pulling hard, but something was dragging him down, something beneath the surface. "Don't let go!" he cried. She pulled until her muscles burned. Then suddenly, he was gone. The ice sealed over, smooth as glass. Evelyn collapsed, sobbing, "Jonas!" From beneath the ice, his voice whispered back, "Help me." Then, fainter still, "Join me." At dawn, the storm broke. Rescue teams arrived 2 days later, finding the base abandoned. The drills were frozen mid-operation, and every monitor displayed the same phrase on repeat: "We are free." They never found Evelyn or Jonas, but months later, a new research team returned to Lake Liderson. On their first night, one of the scientists played back the environmental recordings from the lake's hydrophones. Through the static came faint singing, a woman's voice this time, "Libera nos Domine." The engineer frowned. "That name on the file, who's Dr. Clark?" No one answered. But when he looked at the ice outside, he could have sworn he saw a figure kneeling beneath it, a woman with dark hair, frozen mid-scream, her lips still moving. And sometimes when the wind dies and the air falls still, the ice sings again, a chorus of trapped voices rising from below, calling for deliverance. Locals don't go near Lake Liderson anymore. They say the voices have learned new words. Now, when you listen closely, you can hear them whisper through the static, "Your name." The Bellamy Orphanage had been abandoned for over 70 years, yet the townspeople of Dorset still crossed the road rather than walk past its crumbling gates. When Paul Harris arrived with his film crew, the locals stared like he was walking into a grave. Documentary research, he told the shopkeeper who sold him batteries, about the orphanage fire. The old man shook his head. There was no fire, lad, just silence. One night, all the children stopped singing. Paul smiled politely. That's one version. We'll find out the truth. The truth was, Paul didn't care about history. He wanted viral footage, the kind of paranormal investigation that would get clicks. His crew, Maya, Tom, and Eli, followed him up the muddy hill that led to the ruins, carrying tripods and cameras. The orphanage loomed like a rotting castle, its roof half collapsed, windows hollow and black. Maya shivered. Are we sure this is safe? Paul grinned. It's perfectly unsafe. That's why people will watch. Inside, the air smelled of dust and mildew. Faded murals of smiling children lined the halls, their eyes eaten away by mold. Creepy enough? Paul asked, switching on his headlamp. Tom aimed his camera at a broken staircase. Place looks like it's been frozen in time. Eli unpacked audio equipment. According to the archives, the matron, Miss Bellamy, ran this place until 1948. Then everyone vanished overnight. No official explanation. Maya frowned. How does a whole orphanage vanish? Paul shrugged. That's what we're here to find out. Lights up, everyone. Let's roll. They began filming in the main hall, the wind sighing through cracked glass. Paul addressed the camera dramatically. Tonight, we explore the remains of Bellamy Orphanage, where 19 children and their caretaker disappeared without a trace. Locals claim they still hear laughter echoing at night. We'll find out if that's true. He signaled to Eli, who played a faint chime on a small bell. This was found near the choir room, Paul said, supposedly used to call the children for supper. Almost immediately, a faint giggle drifted through the air. Maya turned. Did you hear that? Tom froze. That came from upstairs. Paul smiled politely. That's perfect. Keep rolling. They climbed to the upper floor, their boots crunching on broken glass. The corridor was lined with doors. On one of them, faded letters read Dormitory A. Paul pushed it open. Inside, rows of iron-framed beds sat neatly, though every mattress was rotted through. On one wall, someone had scrawled dozens of tally marks, and beneath them the words, "We sang for her." Maya whispered, "What does that mean?" Eli's recorder clicked softly. "Guys, I'm getting interference, like someone's whispering through the channel." Paul leaned close to the mic. "Say that again?" A faint child's voice came through. "She said we'd never grow up." Eli pulled off his headset. "That's not a glitch." Paul's grin widened. "Now we're getting somewhere." Hours passed as they filmed in every corner, the kitchen, the playroom, the chapel. Each time, Eli's recorder picked up faint sounds, laughter, footsteps, humming. By midnight, the team was exhausted. They gathered in the old chapel for their final segment. Maya rubbed her arms. "Can we please wrap this up? It feels like the walls are listening." Paul positioned the camera toward the altar. 5 minutes more. We'll end with a seance scene. Tom muttered. "You said no actual seance." "It's for atmosphere," Paul said. "Pretend." They sat in a circle. Paul held the bell again. "Miss Bellamy, if you're still here, give us a sign." The wind outside died completely. A second later, the bell rang. Paul froze. His hand hadn't moved. The sound echoed again, ding, 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 from the far corner of the chapel. Eli whispered, "Paul, stop! I didn't touch it." The bell rang one final time, then silence. Then, faintly, singing. Children's voices, high, sweet, distant, singing a lullaby none of them recognized. Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God, they're here!" Eli pointed to the window. There! Dozens of small handprints appeared in the dust on the glass, pressing from the outside. Tom stumbled backward. "That's enough, we're leaving." But the door slammed shut on its own, locking them inside. The singing grew louder, circling them. Paul shouted, "Keep recording! Don't stop!" The lights flickered, shadows moving across the walls like children running. Maya screamed as a cold hand brushed her shoulder. "Paul, something touched me!" Eli's camera jerked violently as he spun. "There's someone behind the altar!" They saw her then, a tall, thin figure in black dress, her face pale and blurred by the flickering light. "Welcome back, children," the figure said softly. Paul's voice shook. "Who are you?" She tilted her head. "Miss Bellamy, I've been waiting." The air turned freezing, breath fogged in front of their mouths. Eli whispered, "We should go." But the figure smiled, and behind her, rows of small shapes emerged from the shadows, the children. Their eyes were hollow, mouths stitched with faint lines of red. The singing became a scream. Paul's camera fell, spinning as it hit the floor, capturing flashes of faces, hands, movement, and then blackness. When police found the building 3 days later, they discovered the crew's van still parked outside, frost covering the windows. Inside the orphanage, only one thing remained: a single camera lying in the chapel, battery dead, but memory card intact. The footage showed the final 20 seconds of their lives. The camera lay on its side, facing the altar. A faint child's voice whispered, "Now we'll all be in the movie." Then, in the final frame, Miss Bellamy's face filled the lens, smiling. Months later, the footage was leaked online. Paranormal enthusiasts dissected every frame. Some claimed to hear whispers layered under the static. "Stay and sing with us!" Others noticed something else. In the last shot where Miss Bellamy's eyes met the camera, a reflection appeared behind her. 4 adult figures, faintly visible, holding cameras. Their mouths were open in silent screams. The building was sealed again, but locals say the power company receives constant complaints from hikers about strange interference in their headphones when passing the hill. A faint nursery rhyme plays on repeat, and if you listen long enough, right before the static ends, you can hear a woman's voice whisper gently, "Good night, my children, good night." Then comes the sound of a bell ringing, once, twice, 3 times.
The Walkers moved into the house on Hawthorne Street during the last week of summer. It was the kind of quiet, tree-lined neighborhood that looked pulled straight from a real estate brochure. White fences, trimmed lawns, the smell of barbecue on weekends. To Mark and Rebecca Walker, it was the start of a new life. Their teenage son, Ethan, however, didn't seem impressed. "This place is ancient," he muttered as they unloaded boxes. "Looks like it's haunted." Rebecca smiled. "It's charming, not haunted. You'll get used to it." But Ethan was right about one thing. The house was old. Built in the 1920s, its floorboards creaked like whispering voices, and the wallpaper peeled in curling strips. On the first night, the wind rattled the windows, and the family slept uneasy. The next morning, Ethan was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, pale and distant. "Rough night?" Mark asked, pouring coffee. Ethan didn't look up.
Someone was talking in my room. Rebecca froze. What do you mean, talking? He shrugged. A man's voice said my name. Mark chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Dreams, buddy. Happens to everyone. But Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at the hallway as if listening. Within a week, the voice came again. Ethan woke around 2 a.m. to a cold draft and the faint sound of whispering from his closet. He sat up, heart racing. Dad? No answer. The whisper grew clearer, shaping into words. Ethan, come down. He stood slowly, every instant screaming to run, but his feet moved toward the sound on their own. The closet door opened easily. Inside was nothing but darkness. Then, faintly, he saw movement, a reflection maybe, or a shadow shifting at the back. Who's there? He whispered. The darkness whispered back, I remember you. Ethan slammed the door and ran. At breakfast, Rebecca noticed the scratch marks on his arm. Ethan, what happened? He hesitated. I don't know. Maybe in my sleep. Mark frowned. You're spending too much time on those horror videos. You're psyching yourself out. Ethan looked up slowly. He said he knows me. Who? The man in my room. Rebecca exchanged a worried glance with her husband. Maybe we should have the pastor come bless the house, she said softly. Mark sighed. It's an old house. It creaks. It settles. There's no ghost. But when he checked Ethan's room later, he found something carved faintly in the inside of the closet door. I remember you. He didn't mention it to anyone. Over the next few days, Ethan's behavior changed. He stopped eating. He spent hours in silence, staring at walls or whispering to himself. One afternoon, Rebecca found him sitting on his bed, humming an unfamiliar tune. "Sweetheart," she said gently. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were distant, cold. "Do you know what happened here before us?" he asked. "No," she said, startled. "What do you mean?" "The boy who lived here before? He never left." Rebecca's heart skipped. "Ethan, there was no boy before you." He smiled faintly. "There was. He's waiting in the basement." She didn't sleep that night. 2 days later, the temperature in the house dropped sharply, even though it was late August. Mark called an electrician, thinking it was the thermostat. He checked everything, frowning. "Wiring's fine, but this room," he pointed to Ethan's, "is 15 degrees colder than the rest of the house. That's not electrical." That evening, Mark placed a small camera on Ethan's dresser, just to ease Rebecca's nerves. "Humor me," she said. When they watched the footage the next morning, Mark went pale. At exactly 2:14 a.m., Ethan sat upright in bed, his eyes open, unfocused. Then, in a low, guttural voice, he whispered, "Don't send me back." The lamp flickered. A dark shape moved briefly at the foot of his bed, too tall, too still to be a shadow. Then Ethan lay back down. Rebecca covered her mouth. "Mark, what's happening to him?" "I don't know." They called Father Daniel, the local parish priest. He arrived the next day, carrying a small wooden cross and a flask of holy water. When he entered Ethan's room, the air grew colder still. "Ethan," the priest said gently, "may I speak with you?" Ethan sat at his desk drawing in a notebook. The priest glanced down. The page was covered with black scribbles, shapes that looked like faces, twisted and screaming. "What are you drawing, son?" Ethan looked up slowly. "Them." "Who?" "The ones who live in the walls." Father Daniel swallowed hard. "May I pray for you?" He smiled. "You can try." The priest sprinkled holy water and began the prayer. The lights flickered. The walls groaned. Ethan's chair tipped backward as his body convulsed violently. His eyes rolled white. "He's mine," he screamed in a voice that wasn't his own. Father Daniel stumbled back, clutching his cross. "In the name of the Father!" Ethan's body fell limp. Then, in a small, trembling voice, he whispered, "Help me." Rebecca rushed forward, sobbing, "Ethan, baby, I'm here!" But when she touched him, his skin was ice cold. The next morning, the priest returned with a thermal reader and a colleague from the diocese. They spent hours in the room whispering prayers. Finally, Father Daniel emerged, face pale. "There's something here," he said, "something ancient. It's not pretending anymore." Mark clenched his fists. "You're telling me my son is possessed?" The priest hesitated. "He's being used as a vessel. The entity claims to have lived here before, a boy who died in 1954. Rebecca shook her head. "A boy? What boy?" The priest looked at her sadly. "A fire. The family that owned this house then, 3 died in the basement. Only their son survived. For 3 days, they found him curled near the furnace, burned, but smiling." Rebecca gasped. "And now?" The priest said quietly, "He's back, through your son." That night they prepared for the exorcism. Candles lined the floor. Holy water soaked the bedsheets. Father Daniel began to pray. Ethan sat motionless, his head bowed. "Ethan," he said softly, "can you hear me?" When the boy lifted his head, his eyes were pitch black. The voice that answered was not his own. "You cannot cast out what is home." The walls shook. A picture frame fell, glass shattering. "Leave him," the priest commanded, "in the name of God Almighty." Ethan screamed, the sound not human, something layered like 2 voices speaking through one throat. His body arched violently, eyes glowing faintly red in the candlelight. Rebecca sobbed, clutching Mark's arm. "Please help him!" Father Daniel pressed the cross against Ethan's forehead. "The Lord rebuked thee, spirit of deceit." The boy thrashed, growling, the air filled with sulfur. Then Ethan's voice broke through, weak and trembling. "Mom! Dad!" Rebecca fell to her knees. "I'm here, sweetheart! Keep fighting!" The shadow on the wall behind him twisted, growing larger, its form vaguely human. The priest shouted, "Go back to where you came from!" The candles burst, plunging the room into darkness. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the light returned. Ethan was lying still on the bed, breathing softly. The priest dropped to his knees, exhausted. "It's done," he whispered. Rebecca clutched her son, sobbing with relief. Mark exhaled, tears streaking his face. "Thank God!" But in the corner of the room, the mirror cracked just once. For a few days, everything seemed normal. Ethan ate again. He smiled. He spoke like himself. When Rebecca tucked him in, he said, "Thanks, Mom. I feel better." She kissed his forehead. "You're safe now." As she turned off the light, Ethan whispered, "Tell Father Daniel I'm sorry." Rebecca paused. "For what?" He smiled faintly. "For lying." The next morning, Father Daniel was found dead in his rectory, his rosary charred black. The cause, cardiac arrest. But the doctor couldn't explain the burn marks on his hands, perfect impressions of piano keys. When the Walkers heard the news, Rebecca dropped her cup. "He said he was sorry," she whispered. That night, she woke to the sound of humming from Ethan's room, the same lullaby she used to sing to him as a baby. But the voice was deeper, older. She opened the door slowly. Ethan sat on the edge
of the bed, facing the wall. "Sweetheart?" He turned his head halfway, his smile wrong. "Mom," he said softly, "he's still hungry." The police report that followed was brief and confused. Neighbors heard screams, then silence. When officers arrived, the house was empty. The dinner table was still set for 3. Only one thing stood out. On the kitchen wall, written in soot, were the words, "Don't send me back." Months later, a new family moved into 47 Hawthorne Street. They painted the walls, replaced the furniture, filled the house with laughter. But the teenage daughter, Lily, complained that her room was always cold. Her father smiled. "Old house, kiddo, you'll get used to it." That night, Lily woke to a whisper from her closet. "Lily," the whisper said softly, "I remember you."
When Clara Weston first saw the piano, it stood alone in the center of the auction house showroom, bathed in a shaft of pale morning light. It was magnificent, a 200-year-old Bluthner Grand, ebony black, its gold lettering dulled by time. The auctioneer said it once belonged to an English concert hall that had closed after a fire in 1899. Clara couldn't take her eyes off it. "It's perfect," she whispered. Her agent frowned at the price. "It's also cursed, according to some collectors." Clara laughed. "Then it'll play better than I do." She had been a prodigy once, the Golden Girl of Vienna, the critics called her, until an injury 3 years ago stole the strength from her right hand. Since then, her career had faded into half-hearted recitals and teaching gigs. But as she ran her fingers over the piano's cool keys that morning, she felt something spark again. When the gavel fell, the piano was hers. The instrument arrived at her London flat a week later. The movers struggled to maneuver its weight through the narrow hallway. "Careful," Clara warned, "that's older than all of us combined." When the lid was finally lifted, she noticed something odd. The interior strings and hammers were spotless, no rust, no dust. The tuner confirmed it was perfectly in pitch. "Strange," he murmured. "It's like it's been played yesterday." That night, Clara poured herself a glass of wine and sat before the keys. "Let's see if you remember the classics," she said, smiling. Her fingers trembled as she began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, the same piece she had performed the night her hand gave out. The first notes were tentative, fragile, but as the melody unfolded, the sound deepened, rich, mournful, flawless. By the time she reached the final chord, she was crying. "You still have it," she whispered to herself. Then came a faint reply, a single note from the piano, one she hadn't played. The next morning, she thought she'd imagined it. But when she woke, a sheet of handwritten music lay across the stand. Her name was written at the top in looping cursive, "For Clara, from your friend." The composition was unfamiliar, hauntingly beautiful, full of strange progressions that seemed centuries old. She played the first few bars and stopped, heart pounding. The melody sounded like a lullaby she half remembered from childhood, one her late teacher, Mr. O'Connell, used to hum softly while she practiced. "Impossible," she whispered. "He died years ago." Still, she played the rest. As the final chord faded, a soft vibration ran through the floorboards. From somewhere inside the piano came a sound, a low, humming resonance, like someone sighing in contentment. The next morning, Lydia arrived to check on her. The curtains were drawn, the air thick with dust and candle smoke. Clara sat at the piano, unblinking, her fingers resting on the keys. "Clara?" She turned slowly, smiling faintly. "He's showing me how to finish it." "Who?" "My teacher. He says the last movement will make everything clear." Lydia's eyes darted to the sheets scattered across the floor. Each one bore the same signature, O'Connell. She stepped closer. "Clara, this isn't right. You haven't slept. Let me call someone." Clara slammed the keyboard lid shut, making her friend jump. "Don't interrupt him." Lydia backed away.
I'll come tomorrow, okay? Just rest." When she left, the piano lid lifted again on its own. That night, the playing began earlier. This time, Clara joined in. Her fingers flew across the keys, perfectly synchronized with the unseen player. The air vibrated with sound, the chandelier rattling above. The room darkened, the candles flaring unnaturally bright. As she played the final notes, her body trembled violently. Her voice broke in a sob. "What do you want from me?" The answer came through the piano, a chord so deep it rattled the glassware. Then in her teacher's voice, soft and clear, "Stay." The world tilted, the sound grew unbearable, pressing into her skull. Clara screamed, and everything went black. When Lydia returned the next morning, the flat was silent. The air was colder. The piano sat gleaming in the center of the room, its lid open. On the music stand rested a single sheet of paper, written in Clara's handwriting. "Finale. To my master. May we play forever." The police were called when Lydia found no sign of her. The doors were locked from the inside, but one officer swore he heard faint music as they carried the piano away to evidence storage. He later described it as the saddest lullaby I've ever heard. Months passed. The investigation went nowhere. The piano was eventually sold again, this time to a private collector in Edinburgh. He hired a tuner to inspect it. When the technician opened the lid, he found something wedged beneath the strings. A small scrap of paper and what looked like a lock of hair. The note read, "I am home." That night, the new owner called a friend. "You have to hear this," he said over the phone. "It plays on its own." The call ended with a single high-pitched note and silence. He was found the next morning, seated at the piano, eyes wide open. In the years that followed, the piano's trail continued, bought, resold, donated, reclaimed, each owner reporting strange occurrences. The keys playing themselves at 3:03 a.m. Unfinished compositions appearing on blank pages. A faint voice whispering, "You're almost perfect." One music historian, Dr. Helen Orsini, tried tracing the piano's origin. Her research led to an 1899 news article. "Fire at the Royal Hall. Bluthner Grand claims 6 lives." During the final concert, a blaze erupted beneath the stage. The pianist, Seamus O'Connell, refused to stop playing. Witnesses claimed the melody continued even after he fell. The piano was the only item recovered intact. She published her findings, calling the case an echo of obsession. 2 weeks later, her neighbors reported hearing piano music from her apartment. She had no piano. Today, the Bluthner Grand sits in a glass enclosure at the Royal Conservatory of London, labeled simply as the Weston instrument. Visitors say the air near it hums faintly, like the vibration of distant strings. At night, security guards report hearing soft music echoing through the halls. An unfinished nocturne, played with extraordinary grace. The surveillance footage always shows the same thing. The piano lid rising slowly, keys moving in perfect rhythm, and a faint silhouette seated before it. A woman with long dark hair, head bowed, smiling faintly as she plays. And when the piece ends, she turns toward the camera. Her lips move, silently, but the words are unmistakable. "Don't stop, Clara. You're almost perfect."